The House has before it House Concurrent Resolution 3036, which has been read. Mr. Chief Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, House Concurrent Resolution 3036, introduced by Representatives Steiner and other House sponsors. House Concurrent Resolution 3036 is a concurrent resolution to amend and reenact Section 18 of Article 10 of the Constitution of North Dakota, relating to constitutional authorization for the Legislative Assembly to provide by law for direct payments to North Dakota residents. Mr. Speaker, your Judiciary Committee recommends do not pass by a vote of 7 yeas, 5 nays, 2 absent, and 0 not voting. Mr. Speaker.
Representative Baining.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly. House Concurrent Resolution 3036 is very similar to the first resolution that Representative Marigos had. Basically, your House Judiciary Committee voted do not pass on this for all the same similar reasons as that bill. Mr. Speaker, may I continue?
You may continue.
After hearing some of the testimony on this in Alaska, you know, they get their monthly, their check comes like once a year. And some of the things, reports we've heard in that, as soon as this check comes out, the jails are full. There's a lot of spousal abuse, and all, you know, jails fill up from all the violence from everybody getting their checks and going out and doing what they're going to do. You know, what do we do here? I mean, we're already giving away billions of dollars in tax relief. Do we take some of that money, keep it back? Do we send it out? Who do we send it to? I mean, it's going to be a big issue. And are we going to have people moving to the state just to get the $1,000 or $2,000 a year? We don't know. We have to put that all in the legislation. So I mean, it's a good idea. It should have been in place maybe 20 years ago before we started giving money back to schools and to cities and so forth. It would have been a good concept then, but I think now, Mr. Speaker, this is a bill that needs to go to the wayside. Minnesota did this probably about 12 years ago, and they're still blaming the money that Governor Ventura gave back, the $1 billion. They're still blaming him for their deficits they're having today, and I guess I don't want to be blamed for a deficit that we give money back in this direction. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd urge you do not pass in House Concurrent Resolution 3036.
Is there any discussion? Representative Steiner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members of the House. I hope that when people get their property tax reductions, we don't fill the jails up or that we see abuse. I had a constituent who asked if he could get a check instead of getting the property tax reduction. And this idea is not about Alaska or taking the legacy fund. This is about a concept. Instead of the subtraction on your property tax, could we put the check in that envelope? And their property tax is what it is, and whatever we can afford to give, if it's $500, if that's what we're subtracting off property tax this go around, then the check is in there. They can see what we're donating towards their property tax reduction, and if the locals decide they want to do something else with property tax, then that's their responsibility. It's a way to say this is what we're doing and this is what they're doing, in a kind of a separation. So as I said, this idea is not about a one-time in addition to the property tax. My idea was that, and if you look on line 21, it says that this would allow the legislature to set the terms and conditions. So if you decided that you didn't want to just address property tax people because it's not the general population, as this bill says, then you would include possibly renters as well. You could look at the general population and how do we return some money back to address our concerns. I would just appreciate some support on this concept. I prefer this method rather than the road we've gone down, but you went down that road before I got here, and I guess I'm still following behind you. Thank you.
Further discussion, Representative Glasheim.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly. I rise in support of this bill. I think it's something that the people of North Dakota would really enjoy having a chance to vote on, and I think they would pass it if given that chance. I hope you'll do the same today.
Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a one-time resident in the state of Alaska for 10 years, I benefited from this fund, permanent dividend fund. My son benefited from it. My neighbors benefited from it. Their kids benefited from it. And you knew exactly when that check was in the mailbox because the people spent it. It was discretionary funds that you would not normally get and not normally have, and you used it. And the state of Alaska could retain those funds if you wished. And they would hold those funds until your child or when you decided that those funds were necessary to use. My son retained his funds and was able to pay for almost 1 full year of college with those funds. I did something better with mine. I bought decoys and airplane tickets to North Dakota and went hunting. Okay. Those funds are used. My neighbors used them to buy clothes for their kids for winter. Other neighbors used it to pay their utility bills. There's a definite advantage for that. And yes, I understand that it's an entitlement. But if you write the legislation such so that entitlement is ruled by this body, you can control that. And I think it is of benefit. I think the people should have the right to vote on that. And I'm going to let the District 31 residents have a chance to vote on it, and I hope that you would do the same. Thank you.
Is there further discussion? Representative Kay Koppelman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly. This has been an interesting debate on both of these measures. As has been mentioned, there are similarities, but there are differences. The committee had good hearings on these and had good discussion and good debate on them as well. This is a bit of an old friend, not because we just had a similar resolution, but because we've had several resolutions like this over the past several years. I can remember 2 that the Constitutional Revision Committee dealt with just in recent years. And what's different this time is a lot of talk about Alaska. In both of the hearings that we had, the discussion was, we've got oil money, let's write the people a check. Well, as you know, we don't pay those oil taxes. We use them perhaps to reduce other taxes, but they come in from the oil companies doing business in our state. And this would do something else. This would divert them to our populace if you take that approach. You can judge whether that's good public policy or not. The other thing that's very different is that normally when these items have come before us before, they've dealt with the section just above the added language in this resolution. If you look at the resolution before us, starting in line 17, it says, "But neither the state nor any political subdivision thereof shall otherwise loan or give its credit or make donations to or in aid of any individual, association, or corporation, except for reasonable support of the poor." And that's longstanding constitutional language. And the way that other proposals have sought to deal with this is by inserting language in there that says, except a return of taxes, or something similar. The theory was, the idea was mentioned of what Jesse Ventura advocated when he was governor of Minnesota, sending everybody a check. And that was the idea of taking what taxpayers had paid and sending it out to them. In other words, returning some of that money. It seems to me that in addition to there being conflict in the way this resolution is written, it raises some other serious questions. If you read it, it says that an allocation authorized under this section must be in a uniform amount for each eligible individual. Now it says above that we could decide the eligibility, but if the eligibility was for taxpayers, it has to be uniform. If you paid $1,000 in taxes and income tax, and I paid $2 in income tax, we'd have to get the same value of a check, the way I read this. If it's a $500 check, you'd get $500 of your $1,000 back. If it's a $500 check and I paid $2 in tax, I'd be making out like a bandit to the tune of $498. Beyond that, I think it's a real question we need to ask ourselves from a policy perspective. If we want to be able to refund tax dollars, and that's a debate, is it better to lower our taxes and allow the people to keep more of their own money? Is that an economic stimulus across the board by being a low-tax state versus artificially taking it from them or from someone else and playing Robin Hood and then hitting the jackpot on the magic day of the month or year when it comes to their mailbox and we expect a little spike in economic activity when that happens? That's a philosophical debate, and there may be varying opinions on that. But there are a lot of questions here. Do we want to be Robin Hood? Do we want to be distributing equal amounts to people who are not equally paying? Those of you who value and support a progressive income tax, a graduated tax, this is not that. This is flat across the board. So, Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly, the committee gave this good consideration. We had a good hearing on it, we had good debate, and we just don't think this is the right vehicle. We believe it's a flawed vehicle, and if we want to approach this idea, it should be in another form. So we hope you will uphold the committee's recommendation and vote no.
Representative Casper.
Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly, it seems like North Dakota is in a state of euphoria. I asked Representative Thorson to find the definition, and there's two words that come up: a feeling of well-being and a feeling of elation. That's sort of the situation we find ourselves in today with our surplus, mostly due to a finite resource, oil. I look upon a bill like this sort of as an allowance that a father or mother might give to the child. You sort of get used to it. And after a while, if the parent wishes to change that allowance, the children don't like it. Not only don't they like it, they want more. And Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly, that's where I see the danger of this bill. It's human nature that we don't want change, and if you get something for nothing, you want more of something for nothing. There is not something for nothing. These are dollars that our state collects. If we believe we need to give them back to the people, we have other ways to do so, not by entering into these waters that are uncharted and probably dangerous for our state. I hope we'll have a lot of red votes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Zeiser.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly, I certainly support this bill. As our present tax structure has set out in many different ways, whether it's corporate, income, property, extraction taxes, you name it, it's all involves some sort of interest group. But what this does is really allows money to be given back to the individuals of the state. You don't have to be a member of a group. All you have to do is be an individual resident of the state of North Dakota. And thus, I think it's the fairest, most direct, probably the most efficient means by which to redistribute the money. So I would hope that we would have some green votes on this bill, especially since we defeated the last one, which I think was a good bill as well. So I urge a yes vote. Thank you.
Representative Ruby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I won't be long, but I just thought I should explain why I'm going to vote yes. I don't necessarily endorse an Alaska-type system of giving money back and having an ongoing process. But I remember probably it was in '05 we had probably our first surplus because '03 was a very tight session because of 9/11 that happened in '01. So '03, a lot of our projections fell short, and it was a very tight budget that year. Well, by '05, the revenue started to pick back up, and it wasn't because of oil at that time. I mean, it might have been a certain part of it that was part of oil revenues, but the fracking and all the big frenzy that we see now did not take place. But we had a surplus, and I remember one of the colleagues from my class, the year that I came in, had proposed to possibly give some of the tax money back as a one-time thing to give money back to the taxpayers. And we were told that we were not able to because of this portion of the Constitution. So I look at it as more of an option that we would have in the future to do something like that, not something like what Alaska is doing at this time. And just for a point of information, I heard the reference to Robin Hood, and everybody says, well, he took from the rich and gave to the poor. Well, he took from the government, who was the king, and gave to the taxpayers. So I just clarify that.
Further discussion. Representative N. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Steiner respond to a question?
Representative Steiner, would you respond to a question?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I will.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Steiner, in line 3, it says it must be in a uniform amount for each eligible individual. Could that uniform amount be a percentage? So it would be 1% or 2% of, say, your taxes?
Mr. Speaker and Representative Johnson, when I had this drafted, I asked Legislative Council to allow the legislative branch the flexibility to determine how this would be done. And this is what they came up with. And he felt that because it's in the Constitution, the word uniform had to be used. But if the legislature were to choose a percentage, I guess we'd have to refer to Legislative Council on that.
Representative Becker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly, I'm going to vote no on this bill. I view it as putting us as the middleman, as a benefactor, and I really don't want to be a benefactor. I'd really like to work hard on letting the taxpayers keep the money in their pockets rather than having them give it to us and then we redistribute it. And as I read it here, it really would be yet another form of redistribution that would be hard to close once we've opened that door. Thank you.
Representative Belter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly. First of all, I'd like to say I think Alaska's in trouble. Their oil industry is in big trouble, and this redistribution of wealth that they have had is got them in trouble. It's been our duties as representatives to meet the needs of the people and then to reduce the taxes to a level that meets and keep the taxes at a level that meet the needs of the state of North Dakota. And I think that's what we've done over the past legislative sessions, where we've been making reductions in taxes. We've been giving support to our local subdivisions, to our people, through property tax relief. And I just don't think that this idea of redistribution is a proper approach, because it leads to dependency, and that's not what we want. We want a free society that's made North Dakota and America great. Going in this direction won't do it. So I would hope that you would uphold the committee's recommendation.
Representative Lauser.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. About 2 months ago, House Bill 1220 was defeated. It was a bill I introduced that did something similar to this with regard to property tax reform, but it would have required this change first. I also spoke against the bill on the floor because this had to happen first. I think I'm somewhat in favor of this now, because this could provide the path to property tax reform if it were focused just on property taxes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Strinden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Will Representative Steiner yield to a question?
Representative Steiner, would you yield to a question?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I will.
Representative Strinden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Steiner, so everybody's been talking a lot about Alaska and the ways that this isn't working in other states, but this bill would just allow the legislator to cut monetary checks for tax relief instead of just tax breaks. It wouldn't necessarily have to be a redistribution of wealth, right?
Mr. Speaker and Representative Strinden, my idea was that instead of the subtraction on your property tax statement, that dollar amount would be in the form of a check. It wasn't that we would do a check in addition to what we're already doing with property tax. That was the concept.
Thank you.
Representative Clemene.
Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly, I'd like to take us back a little bit in time to November 2nd, 2010. The voters approved the North Dakota Legacy Fund. And in that fund, a lot of money is going in there, but that constitutional provision says that no amount of that principal can be taken out until after June 30, 2017. And I think once that date comes, and if we start paying checks to people, there's going to be an awful lot of pressure on this legislative assembly to keep those checks coming by taking them out of that 15% that's in the legacy fund. And I don't think that was the intention that we set this up for. We intended that this would be something lasting that would serve the state well when we ran out of that oil that is funding that legacy fund right now. But I don't think that's going to happen. Avarice and greed are going to take over, and we'll be getting an awful lot of pressure from the people that want to get paid for us to be taking 15% out every legislative session, plus all of the interest, and sending it to them in the form of checks.
Representative Mooney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would Representative Steiner stand for another question?
Representative Steiner, would you yield to another question?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I will.
Representative Mooney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Steiner, my question is, with regards to property tax, if it were a situation where then a check was cut for the example of $500, is there a mechanism that would be put in place then to replace that back to the local level?
Representative Steiner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Mooney. No, I mean, you would not, the property taxes are levied locally. We don't have control over that. And we are sending money back now through a property tax reduction system. But instead of sending that as a subtraction, there would just be, it would be a different way of doing it. They would levy what they levy, and the state supports that local system by a check of $500. And it was never my intention to address legacy fund or that this is on top of what we're already doing in property tax reduction, but just that they would see what our support is and they would see what their local governments are doing, all in the same envelope.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Hedlund.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I realize that we beat this to death, but I'd just like to make a couple of comments. What money are we talking about here? Do we have a bunch of money in a savings account somewhere that we can freely give back to people that have earned it? I don't know that we do. I hear all kinds of chatter on how that we're a ways away from balancing our budget right now. So I'm not sure what money we're talking about, unless we're talking about future revenue that's anticipated. And where is that revenue coming from? I think we all know what we're talking about here. And I find it somewhat ironic that the very people that talk about the reduction in oil taxes are the same people that are wanting to grab some of this money and send it back to people that haven't earned it. Whose money is it? Is it the states? Is it the states to give it away freely? Does it belong to the mineral owners? Whose money is it? I think that's a question we're talking about here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Carlson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly. This is kind of an old friend. It's been around many times talking about whether or not we should write checks back to the citizens of North Dakota. But obviously it's a little bit more of a hot topic today because we seem to have, everybody has this perception that we have this pot of gold like Representative Hedlund talked about. Well, I can tell you as a matter of fact that this chamber has sent back over $1.2 billion to the taxpayers in North Dakota. And they send it back to exactly to the group that's paid it. They didn't pick winners or losers. They sent the money back to the people who paid it. The property tax owner, the business owner, the individual who paid income tax. And I believe, and Representative Schmidt talked about putting the money to good use, every time they get that paycheck, they have more money in it to put it to good use. They don't wait once a year for a check. They get that money each and every month when we lower the income tax, or each and every 2 weeks, whatever their check is based on. So this is way back in history in the United States, there was a wise man who talked about what happens when the people can vote largesse from the Treasury. He said the republic will no longer stand. Why wouldn't you vote for this if it was on the ballot? Free money. Why wouldn't you? If it's so important, and we're going to have this argument on other issues, why shouldn't we have the people do it if they want to do it instead of the legislature do it? We have done our part. We have committed $1.2 billion to tax relief to our citizens. We should not be in the redistribution business, like Representative Belter said. That should not be the role of government. But on the other hand, we should adjust our tax rates so more people want to work here, more people want to live here, more people want to start businesses here. That should be the job of this assembly, not passing something like this. It might be well intended, but let me tell you, I'm not a constitutional expert, but I read Section 18, I read the first part, it says you can't do it, and the second part says you can do it. One of those two parts has got to be wrong. You can't do that. So somebody smarter than me would have to interpret which one prevails if you pass this bill. Yeah, so I don't know. But I think that we need to give this a red vote, because I think the legislature's responsibility is to create a tax policy that's fair to our citizens and our businesses, not design a program where everybody gets something back out of the Treasury. And I think, Mr. Speaker, I hope that we give this the red vote it deserves.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the House has before it for final consideration House Concurrent Resolution 3036. The clerk will open the key and you may record your vote. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Key will be closed. The clerk will take the record. The final vote shows 29 yeas, 64 nay, 1 absent, not voting. House Concurrent Resolution 3036 is declared failed. The House will be on the